It's so cool. So wrap notes. I've run to a few people, and one's actually on the call now. Never heard this word wrap note. How would you define wrap note?
So my definition of mortgage wrap, I try to simplify it, is just seller financing of a property. And by the way, we don't pay off the mortgage, but it is seller financing. So in a seller finance transaction, you're drafting up a note that the buyer now owes over to the seller. You're drafting up a deed of trust. Your warranty deed has a vendor's lien in there since there's a mortgage being created. So your wrap note, and Texas just passed a bit of legislation in regard to managing or governing how wrap mortgages, wrap notes are dealt with. But it's just simply a seller finance note that acts the same as a Wells Fargo or Bank of America note. Has all the protections. We try to mimic a standard transaction in our wraps or sub twos to just make it more legitimized, I guess, more protected in the event that there's any kind of problem. So it's just a seller finance note.
Gotcha. So when we talk about these things, we're looking to buy that wrap note, right? Or lend money against that wrap note where you own the note. You can do what you want with it. You can sell it. You can sell partial on it. You can borrow against it. We call hypothecation. If you want to learn more, I actually have an FAQ and take a look at the past webinars. But can you talk just briefly about these kind of things? Can you legally sell that note to a note buyer?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. That's where you get into looking at, all right, was it closed via RMLO and disclosures? Did it comply with Dodd-Frank, comply with state laws, comply with SAFE Act? And you know, if you're in the business, like for instance, we mentioned Nick before we got started. The fella does hundreds and hundreds of these things.
Shout out to Nick Ligamaro.
Yeah, he never does not use an RMLO. While an investor isn't necessarily thinking about selling a note, so they're trying to decide, all right, should I use an RMLO? I'm actually going to post on our sites today when we're finished up about making your note sellable, even if you don't have that as an exit strategy, because just in case. Yeah. And then when I mentioned earlier, y'all were causing some trouble. What happened is these folks who know that they want to possibly sell the equity portion of a note that they have, they've bifurcated or dissected a mortgage wrap into now a sub two acquisition with a seller finance carryback, so that they can sell the seller finance carryback or sell the sub two portion. And so I had to acquiesce these people who were dissecting mortgage wraps. And at first I didn't understand the benefit of it, but if you're going to sell a note, it's better to dissect them into two different notes.
So when we're talking about there is that you can do an 80-20 loan, right? You can do an 80 loan, a 20% loan instead of doing a 100% sale. So just kind of realize that kind of portion of it. So we're talking about these kind of things, and we have been talking. Let's go to some of the questions first before we dive into some stuff. Is the attractiveness of the note subject or the standard of a note buyer want to make a note more attractive? So I did a webinar, a video on this. We've talked about it before. The biggest features of making a note valuable is making sure that collateral file is secure. What does that mean? We talked about RMLO. If you are selling this property to an occupied borrower, someone who is borrowing money from you to occupy the property, you have to go through the RMLO, underwrite, make sure they have the ability to repay. And when they do that, then it becomes a qualified mortgage so that note buyers can buy it, and then the attorneys and judges can't fight you on creating a note. And make sure you use the RMLO to do all that kind of packet, right? The next point is, go ahead, Nathan.
I was just going to say in the RMLO, so first of all, registered mortgage loan originator is what that stands for, registered, or I don't know, some other R word, but anyway, mortgage loan originator. That all came out because of the last crash. So all those laws, SAFE Act, Dodd-Frank stuff you'll hear us talking about, all that kind of came into existence 2012, 2013. So it's been a law now for over 10 years. And it has not been very closely adhered to, I would say, generally. But it's being more and more put under the microscope. It's becoming more and more important to make sure that you're doing it correctly and going through the proper channels. So all that being said, that is one of the biggest reasons that we are very concerned about that. If you're not using an RMLO, it's not necessarily a deal breaker for me in particular, but I will probably have to discount that more because I'm going to have to go and fix it. I am going to have to go through and redo some things to make sure that it is 100% compliant and that it's falling under the correct rules and laws that are out there. So that's number one, making sure that it's done properly so that I don't have extra work to do, so that it's legal and it's compliant and everybody's satisfied on that level.
I like it. That was awesome, Nathan. So the second parts are the numbers, right? Guys, you're enriching your notes, and note buyers, please chime in here, right? You have a big form of people buying and creating notes. We don't want to see a situation where the note rate of the borrower is at 4, 5, 6%. That's not good, right? Because the fact that the rate affects how we can buy it. If we're looking at a note that we need to create, and that note is written at a 6%, and we are going forward and trying to buy it at a 12, it doesn't work, right? What happens is that we try to discount it to get the interest rate higher, and it affects us tremendously. So you make sure that the rate of that note is high enough, right? High enough, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. Get it above a 12, because I promise you, we have a chart that if you look at our website and go to our facts, you'll see a chart that shows that if you write thing at 8 and we're looking for a 13, the discount you can expect. The second part of that is the term. The lower the term, the better it is. With all that said, you're going to make sure the borrower can qualify, right? Make sure that the ability to pay is there. So, Alan, when you're creating notes and you're suggesting that people do these kind of things, is it feasible to, what do you tell people when they find a borrower that isn't able to afford a note that's sellable? What do you tell them to do?
Now, when you say, you said not when it's not separable.
Sellable, meaning the fact that, hey, listen, I have to rate a 5 because the payment for the borrower doesn't work out, right? They can't afford a 10. What do you suggest to people who are writing a 4%, 5% note just to make the borrower happy?
For me, I think it boils down, at least the files that we work with, you kind of have two different buyers. You got a buyer who is, seller finance is fine. I don't have to necessarily. I want to try to avoid that 6.5 or whatever we're at these days. And then you have another borrower who, for some reason or another, can't get a conventional mortgage. And that's when we start having our interest rates up there between 8 and 12. But if their reason for not being able to get a conventional mortgage is they don't have an ability to repay, then we're back down to a problem of that note getting in place in the first place. I don't like seeing someone who's in that ability to repay problem area signing off on a 12, 13% note. So there's all kinds of things that can create a situation where you're not able to get a conventional mortgage. And those are the ones that we see up there at the not 9 to 12 or so. I don't like seeing much above 12. It seems like it just hurts people. Yeah, and we have to worry about, and I keep saying the word wrong, usury law. How do you pronounce USury? I call it usury. Yeah, it's usury. It's usury, okay. And each state may have different regulations, or will have different regulations. And what that means is the cap of what the interest rate can be. You can go above it, but there's some things you have. If you do, you have to qualify and stuff like that. But you have to make sure that you stay below that majority of the time. So. Your RMLO knows this stuff and can work with that, and your attorney can work with that. It all based on what state you're in. Yeah, and the RMLO, we have two different kinds of RMLOs. An RMLO that will come back and say, no, you can't do this, versus an RMLO that comes back and says, hey, here's our data on this, and the seller lender makes a decision on them. And unfortunately, Dodd-Frank is not exact. It says you need to look at debt to income ratios. It doesn't give you the exact numbers. It says you need to look at 8 different items of ability to repay, but doesn't give you specifics on that. So it's good though. It allows you some area to come in and say, all right, well, this person has substantial income flow, but not a lot of savings, or this person has a ton of savings, but not income flow, and start making your decisions.
Yep.
So one of the questions we got before the webinar was from Ryan Bedford, was how do you avoid the due on sale clause? And along with lines, what causes the question, what clauses do we need inside the paper to hold up on legal action? So explain what due on sale means, and then how do you suggest avoiding that error?
Issue. Yeah.
So due on sale clause is simply just the permissive right of the lender to say, hey, the entire note is now due, the entire mortgage is now due because you sold our collateral. And when you say that, obviously in a mortgage wrap sub to, you're selling their collateral. And so my daughter actually works at my office part-time. And so she came across this due on sale clause, and she knew we were closing all these mortgage wraps and such. And so she came in just, confused faces. Well, how do we do this? Because there's this due on sale clause. And so it sounds substantive. It sounds like a deal killer. The issue is, I haven't done a count lately, but at one point in time, we had 3 situations where a lender called the note due out of more than 8,000 transactions. So I did the math on that. It's a lot of zeros percent. So in my world, it's a non-issue. You cannot prevent it. People talk about land trusts, things of that nature. That may confuse a mortgage company. Doesn't necessarily avoid it under the Federal Act, Garden-St. Germain Act. So there is no way to 100% avoid it. However, the fix is relatively simple. If it occurs, we do a little cat and mouse game. We deed the property back. Now we're in compliance, and then deed it right back to the buyer. That's happened on 3 occasions, like I said, and it worked perfectly each time. One as long as 10 years ago, and then the other several years ago. But it's just it doesn't come up. Now, lawyers deal in possibilities, not probabilities. So I have to say, you need to have a plan B. You need to be able to pay off that mortgage. The end buyer may need to sell that. End buyer may need to refinance. But it's for the amount of times that we deal with it, dear Lord, we talk about it a million times more.
So do you put it in any type of entity? And you said not a trust. Do you do anything to protect it, or you just sell it? You transfer the deed?
Putting it in an entity doesn't protect you either. Now, we always advise everyone put their investment properties in entities. But the banks don't want properties back. And they're not watching. I think Wells Fargo has 750,000 loans out there. They can't go every single month and check and see if that's been sold. So it usually pops up because of some error made by the parties. They contacted the bank inappropriately. On one occasion, we had a weird one. Condo regime went bankrupt, changed the legal description of every single condo in there, and that triggered the lender. So that was a completely innocent event. But the ones that I've heard of is some type of error or silliness by the parties.
Yeah.
Bottom
So
line, the bank just wants to get paid.
yeah,
They want their money.
That's it. So I remember hearing about this. I went to my very first note conference in 2009. And they must have been talking about subject twos. I didn't know what any of that meant at the time, but I remember whoever was speaking on stage said, somebody asked the question about due on sale. What do you do about that? Blah, 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 blah. And the speaker said, how many people have ever dealt with that? And like 2 hands went up in a crowd of 200 people. And I'm like, oh, okay. So it's not really a thing. Okay. And that was it, and move on. And over the years, I've heard this come up time and time again. And again, then you say, okay, how many people have ever dealt with this? And 3 in 8,000. Yeah. So it's extremely rare.
Yeah.
As an investor, I deal in probabilities. So it's